Ethan Hayes never expected that cold December night to change everything. The blizzard had swallowed Portland, Maine, when Shadow, his loyal German shepherd, pulled him toward the abandoned Old Port subway station. Inside, on a frozen metal bench, sat a little blonde girl, shivering, clutching a pink backpack with a torn strap. Her cheeks were pale, a faint bruise beneath one eye, and her wide, hollow eyes carried a pain far too old for 6 years. But it wasn't just her silence that made Ethan's chest tighten. It was the single whisper that escaped her lips. "Please, don't send me back." Who was she running from? Why was she here alone in the freezing dark? And more importantly, what would Ethan do next? This story will break your heart and mend it all over again, because sometimes the ones we save are the ones who save us. Portland, Maine, lay frozen under a cruel December storm, the wind howling down empty streets, snow swallowing every sound. Ethan Hayes pulled the collar of his worn canvas jacket tighter against his neck, his breath a pale ghost dissolving into the night. At 48, he looked older than his years, a man carved by grief in winters far colder than this one. His once dark beard was now streaked with gray, and deep lines ran across his weathered face like etchings of battles fought and lost. His steel blue eyes, sharp but tired, were heavy with shadows no amount of sleep could erase. He walked with the gait of someone who had carried too much for too long, shoulders hunched not from the cold, but from memories that refused to let go. Beside him padded Shadow, his 5-year-old German shepherd, a massive, powerfully built dog with thick black and tan fur dusted white with snowflakes. Shadow was trained, disciplined, a quiet protector, but tonight even he seemed restless. His ears twitched at every distant sound, and his amber eyes scanned the darkness like a sentry guarding against invisible threats. To Ethan, Shadow wasn't just a companion. He was the only heartbeat keeping Ethan tethered to the present, the only reason Ethan had not done what he had thought about too many times on lonely nights. 5 years ago, Ethan's wife, Claire, had died in a sudden car accident on an icy road. 2 months ago, his daughter, Emily, just 10 years old, lost her fight against leukemia. Ethan had been there for every round of chemo, every sleepless night, every small, fragile smile she gave him, despite the pain. He'd watched her fade until there was nothing left but silence. Now, some nights, the silence screamed louder than any battlefield he had survived. Tonight was one of those nights. He had walked to the Old Port subway station, long abandoned, its platforms buried under peeling paint and grime. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the quiet. Maybe he wanted to be somewhere no one else would go. Shadow's leash tugged sharply. Ethan stopped, brow furrowing. The dog's hackles rose, ears pricked forward. He followed Shadow's gaze to the far end of the snow-covered platform, where a faint movement caught his eye. At first he thought it was a pile of discarded clothes, abandoned like so many other forgotten things in the city's underbelly. But then the bundle shifted, and he heard it. Faint, fragile, a sound almost swallowed by the storm, a sob. He stepped closer, boots crunching softly against the icy tiles, and the shape came into focus. A little girl sitting alone on a frozen metal bench, knees tucked to her chest, arms wrapped tightly around a faded pink backpack with a torn strap. Her blonde hair was messy and damp, strands plastered against her pale cheeks. Her clothes were thin, a short-sleeved gray hoodie far too small for this weather, its frayed sleeves clinging to trembling arms. Her knees were bare, mottled purple with cold, and her small sneakers were soaked through, leaving dark patches in the snow beneath her. Her lips trembled as she drew ragged breaths, and her wide gray eyes, red-rimmed from crying, stared at nothing. Ethan crouched slowly, careful not to frighten her, his voice low and steady. "Hey there, are you all right?" The girl didn't answer. She tightened her grip on the backpack and scooted an inch away from him, her fragile body shaking harder under the dim, flickering lights. Shadow moved beside Ethan and lay down, his head low, his warm amber eyes locking gently on the girl. That was when something shifted. The little girl's gaze flickered to Shadow, holding there longer than she had looked at Ethan. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Ethan softened his tone. "It's okay. He won't hurt you. His name's Shadow." The girl hesitated, then extended her small, trembling fingers. Shadow pressed his cold nose softly against her knuckles. A shuddering breath escaped her, as though the fragile thread holding her together had almost snapped. Ethan watched her closely, noticing details now: the faint purple bruise beneath her right eye, the rough red marks on her wrists where cuffs or ropes might have dug too deep, and the way her thin shoulders seemed to fold inward, as if she were trying to make herself invisible. "What's your name?" he asked gently. It took her a long time to answer. Her voice was soft, hoarse, as if the words had been buried deep. "Lily." "Lily," Ethan repeated softly, committing it to memory. "Do you have someone waiting for you? Parents? Family?" That was when her face changed. It was subtle, but Ethan saw it. The way her jaw tensed, her eyes darted down, the way she swallowed hard like forcing back a scream. She shook her head quickly, and the wind whistled through the broken windows above them, snowflakes spiraling into the station, settling in her tangled hair. Ethan reached for his jacket zipper, instinctively wanting to wrap her in warmth, but she flinched the moment his hand moved. "Hey," he said softly, hands raised where she could see. "I'm not gonna hurt you, kiddo." She glanced up at him then, meeting his eyes for the first time. Her expression was so small, so haunted, Ethan felt something inside him break. Finally, she whispered, voice cracking like fragile glass, "Please, don't take me back there." Ethan froze, heart pounding against his ribs. Back where? To who? What had this little girl been running from in the freezing dark? Shadow shifted closer, resting his head on Lily's knee, a silent promise of protection. The storm roared outside, but inside that abandoned station, time seemed to stand still. Ethan realized this wasn't just a chance encounter. This night was about to change everything. The wind outside howled against the old brick walls as Ethan Hayes shut the door of his small townhouse, brushing snow off his shoulders. The living room was dim but warm, a modest space filled with muted earth tones and photographs of his late wife Claire and his daughter Emily, memories he both clung to and tried to escape. Shadow padded in first, shaking flakes of snow from his thick black and tan coat before settling down on the rug by the fireplace. Ethan guided Lily gently toward the couch, his hand hovering just behind her in case she stumbled. The little girl looked even smaller under the soft yellow light, her frail frame shivering beneath the oversized hoodie she wore. Her blonde hair was tangled and damp, her pale skin blotched pink from the freezing night air. Ethan could see faint marks along her wrists now, faded bruises and scratches that told silent stories. She sat on the edge of the couch, clutching her pink backpack like a shield, her wide gray eyes darting around the room as though expecting danger to emerge from the shadows. Ethan crouched in front of her, resting his elbows on his knees, trying to soften his voice. "I'm going to make some hot cocoa, all right? Real chocolate. None of that instant stuff." Lily hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. Shadow seemed to sense her unease. The German shepherd quietly padded over and lowered his head onto her knees, his warm breath fogging the worn fabric of her hoodie. She stiffened at first, but then, slowly, her trembling fingers brushed over the top of his head. A faint sigh escaped her lips, so soft Ethan almost missed it. He stood, moving into the tiny kitchen tucked against the back wall. The cabinets bore signs of age, the wood scuffed, but the counter was spotless. Ethan had learned to keep his hands busy when the nights became too long. As he set a pot on the stove, he glanced toward Lily, watching her finally lean slightly against Shadow, her cheek resting on his fur. Something inside him ached at the sight. His mind replayed memories of Emily curled up beside Shadow in almost the same way, before the hospital days stole moments like this from him forever. Minutes later, Ethan returned with 2 mugs. He handed one to Lily, kneeling so their eyes were level. "Careful, it's hot." She took the mug cautiously, fingers wrapped tightly around the handle, as though fearing it would slip away like everything else in her world. She blew gently before taking a small sip, and for the first time since he had found her, the tightness in her expression eased just slightly. After a moment, Ethan spoke softly. "Lily, can I ask you something?" Her fingers froze around the mug, shoulders tensing. She stared down into the swirling chocolate, avoiding his gaze. Ethan didn't push, simply waited, letting the silence settle. Eventually she whispered, her voice raspy and quiet. You won't send me back, right?" Ethan leaned forward, his tone steady and reassuring. "Not if where you came from isn't safe, but I need to understand what happened, kiddo." It was like watching someone peel away a fragile layer of armor. Her lips trembled, but she forced the words out, each one carrying the weight of something no 6-year-old should have to bear. My mom, she died when I was 3, Lily began, her voice breaking on the edges. After that, I lived with Mark. He's not my real dad. Her small hands clutched the mug tighter. He hurts me when he's mad. Sometimes he forgets to feed me. Sometimes he locks me outside at night. Ethan's jaw tightened, his grip tightening around his own mug until his knuckles whitened. A dull roar filled his ears as images he wished he'd never seen surfaced. His Emily hooked up to machines, her thin body bruised from endless needles. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to stay composed for Lily's sake. Mark Dawson, he repeated slowly, memorizing the name. Is he the only one there with you? She shook her head, blonde strands falling into her tear-streaked face. My sister, Lucy. She's my twin. Mark, he likes her more. That caught Ethan off guard. Your twin? She doesn't get hit. She gets new dresses, toys. He says she's the good one, and I'm not. Her voice faltered and she pressed her forehead against Shadow's fur, muffling a choked sob. Shadow leaned closer, pressing his weight into her side, as though anchoring her. Ethan clenched his jaw, forcing down the anger boiling beneath his chest. Before he could respond, Lily whispered something so quietly he almost missed it. He said, I was a mistake. The words landed heavy between them. Ethan reached out, placing a careful hand on the edge of the couch, near her but not touching her, giving her space. Lily, nothing about you is a mistake. Do you understand me? She sniffled, nodding faintly but never lifting her head. Ethan sat back, running a hand through his graying hair. His military years had taught him how to survive ambushes, how to endure chaos, how to walk through hell and keep moving. But this, a broken little girl sitting in his living room, terrified of going home, this was a different kind of battlefield. He thought about calling the police immediately, but memories of Emily flashed through his mind, her tiny hand gripping his during hospital nights, her frightened eyes asking if he could make the pain go away. He couldn't fail another little girl. Not tonight. Instead, Ethan pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed the number of someone he knew he could trust, Grace Morgan, a caseworker for Portland's Child Protective Services. Grace was a woman in her late 30s, tall and slender with sharp cheekbones and warm hazel eyes that carried both exhaustion and kindness. She'd spent 12 years on the job, long enough to see the ugliest edges of humanity, but never hardened enough to stop caring. When she picked up, her voice was firm but gentle. Ethan, it's late. What's wrong? He hesitated, glancing at Lily curled up against Shadow. I found a little girl, out in the storm. She's scared, Grace. Real scared. Grace's tone shifted immediately, the calm professionalism sharpening into quiet urgency. Is she safe with you right now? Yes, Ethan replied, but she doesn't want to go home. From what she's told me, I believe her. There was silence on the other end before Grace sighed softly. All right, Ethan. I'll come by first thing tomorrow morning. Tonight, just keep her warm. Don't press too hard. If she trusts you, that's everything. When he hung up, Ethan returned to the couch, lowering himself onto the floor beside Shadow. We're gonna figure this out, kiddo. I promise. Lily didn't speak, but she shifted slightly, leaning into Shadow's side, eyelids fluttering as exhaustion finally pulled her under. Ethan watched her breathing slow, her tiny chest rising and falling beneath the borrowed blanket he draped over her. He sat there for a long time, listening to the muffled roar of the wind outside, his hand resting on Shadow's back, the weight of everything sinking in. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet resolve began to form. He'd lost Emily. He couldn't save her. But maybe, just maybe, he could save Lily. Tonight was only the beginning. The morning sun struggled to break through the thick layer of gray clouds, casting Portland in a muted, icy light. Ethan Hayes barely slept the night before, his mind replaying Lily's whispered words and the bruises etched into her fragile skin. Shadow rested by the door, ears twitching every time the old wooden floor creaked. At exactly 8:15 a.m., the sound of tires crunching snow outside signaled the arrival of Grace Morgan from CPS. She stepped out of her gray Subaru, pulling her long wool coat tighter around her tall, slender frame. Her light brown hair was tied neatly in a low bun, and her hazel eyes carried the same mix of warmth and quiet fatigue Ethan had heard in her voice the night before. Years of navigating broken families and neglected children had shaped her into someone both empathetic and unyielding. Inside the house, Lily sat curled on the couch, clutching Shadow's thick fur as if anchoring herself. When Grace entered, she softened her expression immediately, crouching to Lily's eye level. "Hi, sweetheart," she said gently. "I'm Grace. I work with families and kids to make sure they're safe." Lily hesitated, her small hands tightening on Shadow's collar, but Shadow leaned against her side, nudging her hand until she relaxed slightly. That small gesture was enough to let Grace approach without pressure. After a quiet moment, Ethan led Grace into the kitchen where they could talk privately. "She doesn't want to go back," he said firmly, his steel blue eyes carrying the weight of his resolve. Grace nodded, pulling out a leather-bound notebook from her satchel. "I need to file an immediate incident report," she explained. "But Ethan, this isn't going to be easy. If Mark Dawson challenges this, and from what I've read in his file, he will, it could get messy." Ethan leaned against the counter, jaw tight. "Messy's fine, as long as she doesn't end up back there." Grace studied him carefully, sensing the unspoken grief that hung around him like a storm cloud. She didn't push further, but her expression softened. "I'll send someone to take photos of her injuries today. We'll need those documented for the case." By late morning, 2 CPS investigators arrived, Detective Carl Bennett and Mia Torres. Carl was in his mid-50s, a stocky man with silver hair cropped short, a square jaw lined with stubble, and eyes like sharp steel. Years on the force had made him direct and pragmatic. "We're here to establish facts, Mr. Hayes," he said, his voice low but authoritative. "Nothing personal. We just want to know if Lily's safe." Beside him, Mia Torres, a young caseworker in her late 20s, set up her tablet. Petite and soft-spoken, with dark curly hair framing a round face and warm olive skin, she handled the photos gently, crouching near Lily with a reassuring smile. "Sweetheart, I'm just going to take pictures of your arms and legs so we can help you, okay?" Lily nodded faintly, her gray eyes darting nervously between Mia and Ethan. Shadow rested his chin on her knee, as if promising her silent protection. The images revealed angry purple bruises on her arms and ribs, faint rope-like marks around her wrists, and a clear outline of past injuries that had begun to fade but left permanent traces. Carl exhaled sharply. "These aren't accidents. This isn't neglect. This is abuse." Grace closed her notebook, her tone steady. "We'll request an emergency protective order. Until the court decides, Lily stays here." But by the afternoon, things escalated. Ethan's phone buzzed, an unknown number. He hesitated before answering. "Mr. Hayes," a cold, sharp voice growled on the other end. "You have my daughter." Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. "Mark Dawson, I assume?" "You've got no right to keep her," Mark spat. "I'm reporting you for kidnapping." The line went dead before Ethan could respond. He glanced at Grace, who had overheard. Her expression darkened. "He's moving fast. We need legal representation before this spirals." That night, Ethan sat alone in the dim living room, Emily's photo frame on the mantel catching faint light from the fire. He thought about his daughter's thin fingers curled around his own during her hospital days, her whispers of, "Daddy, stay." He had failed Emily. He couldn't fail Lily. The next morning, Grace returned with a referral. "Ethan, I've contacted one of the best family attorneys in Portland. Her name's Sarah Coleman. She takes cases like this personally." Sarah Coleman was in her early 40s, tall and lean with sharp features softened by deep-set green eyes. Her dark auburn hair fell in a sleek bob, framing a face that carried quiet determination. She greeted Ethan with a firm handshake when they met at her office later that afternoon. "I've reviewed what Grace sent me," Sarah began, adjusting her glasses as she flipped open a thick case file. Her voice was steady, confident. "This isn't just a custody dispute. This is a safety case. But you need to understand, Mark's attorney will play dirty. He'll paint you as unstable, claim you manipulated Lily." Ethan met her gaze without wavering. "Let him. I've been through worse." Sarah studied him for a moment, reading the lines of grief and resolve etched into his face, before nodding once. Then we fight. Back at Ethan's house, Lily sat cross-legged on the rug, slowly tracing patterns into Shadow's fur with her small fingers. For the first time since they'd met, there was the faintest curve of a smile on her lips, brief but real. Shadow's tail thumped lazily against the floor, his amber eyes half-lidded in quiet contentment. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching them, and felt the edges of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. But his phone buzzed again, breaking the fragile moment. Grace's name lit up on the screen. "Ethan," she said quickly when he answered, "Mark just filed an emergency motion. He's demanding Lily be returned immediately. We have 72 hours before the first hearing." Ethan glanced at Lily, sitting in a small island of safety beside Shadow, and his chest tightened. "Then we'll be ready," he said firmly, his voice low but steady. "This isn't just about custody. This is about her life." Shadow lifted his head, sensing Ethan's tone, and let out a low rumble, as though echoing his promise. The fight had begun. The winter storm showed no mercy on Portland that morning. Snowdrifts swallowed the sidewalks, and sharp winds rattled the thin glass of the courthouse windows. Ethan Hayes stood on the courthouse steps, his breath curling in tight, pale clouds as Shadow, his 5-year-old German shepherd, sat pressed against his leg, sensing his tension. Inside, the air buzzed with muted voices and the faint hum of radiators trying to fight the cold. The courthouse hallway smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood, a mix Ethan remembered from his military discharge hearings years ago. But this was different. Then, it had been his own future on trial. Now, it was Lily's life. Grace Morgan, the CPS caseworker, was already waiting near the courtroom door, her long wool coat draped neatly over her arm. Her light brown hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her hazel eyes carried both exhaustion and quiet fire. She gave Ethan a small nod, her lips tightening into a line that said everything without words. "Be steady. She needs you calm." Beside her stood Sarah Coleman, Ethan's attorney, radiating composed authority in a fitted charcoal blazer and knee-length skirt. Her auburn bob framed her sharp jawline, and behind her square glasses, her green eyes glimmered with restrained energy. She was calm, but Ethan could feel the coiled readiness beneath the surface. She was prepared to fight. "Are you ready?" Sarah asked, her voice low, pitched to reach only Ethan. He adjusted the cuff of his jacket, steel blue eyes narrowing. "Doesn't matter if I am. Lily doesn't have anyone else." Sarah nodded once and pushed open the heavy oak doors. Inside the courtroom, benches lined with dark wood faced a raised platform, where the judge's bench stood beneath a brass plaque. The warmth of the heaters couldn't quite push away the chill. The storm outside pressed its weight against the old building. Mark Dawson sat at the petitioner's table, wearing a pressed navy suit that failed to hide the angry flush crawling up his neck. His short brown hair was slicked back, but his jaw clenched, twitching as though holding back words not suited for a courtroom. Mark's attorney, Daniel Price, sat beside him, a thin man in his mid-50s with neatly combed silver hair, angular features, and a quiet air of calculation. Daniel's pale blue eyes had the cold sharpness of someone who'd spent decades dismantling testimonies without remorse. Mark's gaze found Ethan immediately, lips twisting into something between a sneer and a challenge. Ethan met his stare, jaw set but shoulders steady, Shadow sitting obediently at his heel. The door to the side opened, and the bailiff announced, "All rise for Judge Rebecca Moore." Judge Rebecca Moore entered with deliberate steps, her black robe trailing behind her. In her mid-40s, she carried herself with poised authority. Her dark brown hair, streaked faintly with gray, was pulled back into a low chignon, and her sharp, intelligent brown eyes scanned the room, as though weighing everyone's truths before they spoke. When everyone was seated, Judge Moore leaned forward. "This court is here to address the emergency motion filed by Mr. Mark Dawson regarding the custody of minor Lily Carter." Her voice was even, calm, but carried an undertone of steel. Daniel Price rose first, buttoning his suit jacket. "Your Honor, my client has endured a terrible violation. Mr. Dawson took Lily in after her mother passed. He provided shelter, food, and care, and yet Mr. Hayes has taken it upon himself to remove the child unlawfully. Furthermore, we have reason to believe these so-called injuries are self-inflicted attempts for attention. Lily has a history of exaggeration." Ethan's fists tightened in his lap, but Sarah placed a calming hand on his forearm beneath the table, a silent reminder to hold steady. When it was her turn, Sarah rose slowly, adjusting her blazer with controlled precision. "Your Honor, what we have is not a custody disagreement. What we have is abuse. We have photographic evidence, CPS reports, and documented witness statements showing consistent bruising, malnourishment, and emotional trauma. Mr. Dawson's household has placed Lily in significant danger. Returning her there would cause irreparable harm." Daniel scoffed lightly, muttering just loud enough for the court to hear. "Or so he claims." Judge Moore cut him a sharp glance. "Counselor, maintain professionalism." Then Grace Morgan was called to the stand. Her calm, clear voice outlined everything she'd seen: Lily's malnourishment, bruising, rope-like marks around her wrists, and her withdrawn, fearful demeanor. Grace's testimony was meticulous but filled with quiet compassion, her hazel eyes locking on Judge Moore's. Finally, it was Lily's turn. The small girl walked timidly to the stand, her pale fingers clutching the frayed strap of her pink backpack, as if it might shield her. Her blonde hair, freshly brushed but still uneven from weeks of neglect, framed her delicate face. She avoided looking at Mark entirely, sitting stiff and small in the witness chair. Shadow, sensing her fear, shifted forward and lay near the witness stand, his amber eyes soft but focused. Ethan had requested Shadow stay, and Judge Moore allowed it, recognizing the dog's calming influence on Lily. Sarah crouched beside Lily, keeping her voice gentle. "Lily, do you feel safe with Mr. Dawson?" Lily shook her head silently, her lips pressed into a trembling line. "Can you tell the court why?" Sarah asked softly. For a long moment, the room was silent but for the storm outside. Then Lily's quiet voice broke the air, each word carrying weight heavier than her small frame should bear. "He locks me in the basement. He says I'm broken." Gasps rippled through the room. Even Judge Moore paused, her composed face softening for the briefest moment before returning to formality. Mark shot up from his seat, red-faced. "She's lying!" he barked. "I never—" "Sit down, Mr. Dawson," Judge Moore commanded sharply, her tone cutting through the chaos. "You will remain silent unless addressed." Lily's gray eyes flicked toward Shadow, her hand lowering to rest gently on his back, grounding herself against his warmth. Sarah rested a hand lightly on the table, nodding. "Your Honor, we ask that Lily remain under Ethan Hayes' care while CPS conducts further investigation." Judge Moore exhaled, glancing between the photos, reports, and the trembling child sitting beneath her gaze. After a pause, her verdict was clear. The court grants temporary guardianship of Lily Carter to Mr. Ethan Hayes for 90 days, effective immediately. CPS will monitor weekly, and a follow-up hearing will be scheduled. A quiet hush filled the courtroom, broken only by Ethan's slow, relieved breath. Lily leaned into Shadow's side, her small hand gripping his fur tightly, as if finally believing she was safe, at least for now. But as Ethan glanced toward Mark, he saw the man's expression harden, his jaw tightening into something darker than anger. This wasn't over. The days after the hearing passed slowly, as though the heavy winter clouds above Portland hung lower than ever. Snow blanketed the narrow streets outside Ethan Hayes' modest townhouse, muffling the sounds of the world. Inside, warmth returned in fragments, carried by small moments. Laughter that came shyly, drawings taped to the fridge, the soft patter of paws against hardwood floors. Lily Carter was beginning to breathe again. She spent most of her mornings sitting cross-legged on the living room rug, clutching a set of colored pencils Ethan had bought her, sketching clumsy outlines of dogs, trees, and tiny houses. Shadow, the 5-year-old German shepherd, often sprawled beside her, his thick black and tan coat spilling onto her drawings, his amber eyes half-lidded in quiet patience. When her hand trembled, Shadow nudged her gently, grounding her back into the present. Ethan watched from the kitchen doorway, his steel blue eyes softening in a way they hadn't in years. He'd started brewing tea instead of coffee these days. Sleep was elusive, but for the first time in a long time, he found himself sitting at the kitchen table just to listen to Lily hum quietly as she drew. One evening, as they cleaned up after dinner, Ethan hesitated before pulling a small wooden box from the top shelf. Inside was a single photograph, his daughter Emily at age 10, her blonde hair brushed neatly, her cheeks still round, her smile bright despite the shadow of illness already touching her. He placed the photo in front of Lily gently, his voice barely above a whisper. This was Emily, my little girl. Lily's gray eyes widened. Her small fingers traced the edges of the frame as if it were something fragile. She's beautiful, Lily breathed, her voice cracking. Then, softly, like an angel. Ethan swallowed hard, looking away briefly, fighting the lump in his throat. She loved dogs too, he said, clearing his voice. Shadow was hers first. Lily turned toward Shadow, resting her hand on his neck. I think she'd like that I'm here. That night, after Ethan tucked her into the couch with the Shadow curled protectively beside her, Lily stirred, her voice barely audible. Ethan. He paused at the doorway, glancing back. Yeah, kiddo? Her fingers clutched the frayed blanket tightly, knuckles pale. There's something... I didn't tell anyone. Her voice was trembling, but there was resolve beneath it. He returned to her side, lowering himself onto the edge of the couch, his voice steady and patient. Take your time. She glanced toward Shadow, as though drawing courage from him, then whispered, Mark gets money for me. Ethan frowned, confusion flickering briefly. Money? Lily nodded quickly, her blonde hair falling into her damp cheeks. He told someone I was sick. He said they give him money every month to take care of me. But I wasn't sick. I wasn't. Her voice cracked as tears welled in her eyes. Ethan's jaw clenched, the muscles in his forearm tightening as the weight of her words sank in. He reached for his phone immediately and called Sarah Coleman, his attorney. Sarah picked up quickly, her deep voice steady despite the hour. Ethan, what happened? I think Mark's committing fraud, Ethan said flatly. Lily says he's been collecting money for her care, claims she's sick. There was silence on the other end, then the sound of Sarah shifting papers quickly. That changes everything, she said sharply. If we can prove this, it strengthens our case and opens a criminal investigation against him. I want you and Lily in my office tomorrow. We'll strategize. The next morning, Ethan and Lily bundled into heavy winter coats and made their way downtown. Sarah's law office sat on the 4th floor of a tall glass building, the kind that reflected the washed-out gray skies above. Inside, her workspace was precise and immaculate. Dark wooden shelves lined with case binders, a deep mahogany desk, and floor-to-ceiling windows framing the snow-streaked city. Sarah was dressed in a navy suit, her auburn bob tucked neatly behind one ear, green eyes sharp with focus. She gestured for them to sit. I've already pulled Mark's financial records from public filings. There are regular deposits from an entity called Riverside Care Foundation, a nonprofit specializing in supporting children with terminal illnesses. Lily's tiny hands twisted in her lap, her voice soft. That's what he said. He told them I was dying. Sarah leaned forward, folding her hands atop the polished desk. Ethan, this isn't just fraud, it's manipulation. He's monetized her suffering and kept her in his custody to keep collecting those funds. Ethan's jaw tightened further. So, what do we do? Sarah tapped a neatly manicured finger against a stack of documents. We build a case around financial exploitation. If we can prove intent, we'll expose not just neglect, but motive. That makes it nearly impossible for Mark to regain custody. While they spoke, Lily wandered to a small table near the corner of Sarah's office, sketching absent-mindedly on a notepad. Ethan noticed her drawing. A house with no windows, surrounded by tall fences, and a tiny figure standing outside, clutching Shadow's leash. His chest tightened at the sight, but he said nothing. Later that afternoon, Sarah contacted Michael Hargrove, a forensic accountant in his early 50s with thinning gray hair, round glasses perched low on his nose, and a surprisingly kind demeanor for someone who dealt in numbers. Michael was quiet but methodical, his warm baritone voice carrying confidence without arrogance. He arrived at Sarah's office with a laptop and stacks of records, analyzing Mark's bank activity with clinical precision. These deposits match perfectly with grant cycles from Riverside Care, he explained, scrolling through rows of transactions. But here's where it gets ugly. Mark also submitted falsified medical forms. He clicked on a PDF showing fabricated diagnoses and signatures. Sarah glanced at Ethan, her green eyes alight with grim satisfaction. This is the leverage we needed. Ethan leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. This isn't just about winning custody anymore. He used her like a paycheck. That evening, back at the townhouse, Ethan watched Lily carefully while she fed Shadow scraps of chicken by the fireplace. She giggled softly when Shadow's wet nose brushed her fingers, a sound that was still rare but growing less fragile. For the first time in weeks, Ethan allowed himself to feel something that had seemed impossible since losing Emily. Hope that healing wasn't just for Lily, but for him too. But the discovery brought new weight. Now Ethan and Sarah knew Mark wasn't just abusive. He was calculating, dangerous, and desperate to protect his secrets. Tomorrow, the fight would change. The morning sky over Portland was a sheet of gray, heavy with the promise of more snow. The streets were buried under fresh powder, muffling the usual city noise. But inside Ethan Hayes' modest townhouse, tension hummed like a quiet storm. Shadow, the 5-year-old German shepherd, sat by the window, ears twitching every time a distant siren pierced the air. He sensed the weight pressing on Ethan's shoulders, just as much as Ethan did. By 8 a.m., Sarah Coleman arrived, bundled in a navy wool coat, her auburn bob tucked neatly beneath a knitted scarf. Her sharp green eyes carried an intensity that cut through the cold. "It's happening today," she said, brushing the snow off her sleeves as she stepped inside. "The police and CPS are ready to move. Mark's house is being monitored as we speak." Ethan nodded, his jaw tightening. Lily sat curled on the couch nearby, clutching her worn pink backpack, Shadow's massive body pressed against her side for comfort. Sarah crouched down to Lily's level, her voice gentle but firm. "Sweetheart, you don't have to worry anymore. Today, we make sure you're safe." Around 9:15 a.m., 2 unmarked vehicles pulled up outside. From them stepped Detective Alan Briggs, a seasoned officer in his early 50s with salt and pepper stubble, a tall and sturdy build, and weathered gray-blue eyes that had seen too many broken families. His olive trench coat brushed against his boots as he approached the door, glancing briefly at Ethan. "Mr. Hayes," Briggs greeted, his voice deep but surprisingly warm. "I'm leading the warrant execution. Portland PD and CPS are coordinating together on this." Behind him came Officer Dana Whitlock, a young patrol officer in her late 20s, slim but strong, her dark hair pulled into a practical ponytail. Her sharp brown eyes swept the street with a practiced ease. She carried herself with quiet confidence, the kind built from being underestimated one too many times. Sarah joined them on the porch, tightening her gloves against the icy wind. "We've confirmed everything from Riverside Care and Michael Hargrove's findings. Mark's not just negligent. He orchestrated an entire fraud network." Detective Briggs nodded grimly. "That's why we're moving quickly. Fraud, falsified medical records, and confirmed child abuse? We're not giving him time to bury evidence." By 10 a.m., 3 CPS vehicles and 2 police cruisers rolled silently into Mark Dawson's neighborhood. His 2-story beige house sat tucked behind a leaning wooden fence, its windows frosted over from the night storm. The driveway was buried under layers of snow that hadn't been shoveled, a telling detail. Inside the lead vehicle, Grace Morgan sat beside Detective Briggs, reviewing the emergency custody paperwork. Her hazel eyes were sharp but softened when she glanced at Ethan through the rearview mirror. "Once we secure Lily's sister, Lucy, she'll be transferred to a protected care center. From today forward, she'll be safe too." The team approached the front door quietly, boots crunching softly against snow. Briggs gave a firm nod to Whitlock, who raised her gloved fist and knocked loudly. "Portland PD, open up!" No answer. Briggs counted under his breath, then motioned to the entry team. One officer wedged a crowbar beneath the frozen latch, splintering the door frame with a sharp crack. They moved quickly, weapons drawn but lowered, entering the dim, cluttered living room. The smell hit first. Stale beer, damp clothes, and something sour. "Clear!" one officer called from the hallway. "Kitchen's empty!" another shouted. Finally, from upstairs came the sound of scuffling. 2 officers bounded up, their heavy boots thudding on the steps, before dragging Mark Dawson into view. He looked disheveled, his messy brown hair sticking up wildly, his unshaven jaw shadowed in gray stubble. He wore wrinkled sweatpants and a faded flannel shirt, his face flushed with both rage and panic. "What the hell is this?" Mark roared, his voice hoarse. "You've got no right! This is my house!" Briggs stepped forward, calm but unwavering. "Mark Dawson, You are under arrest for child endangerment, fraud, and falsification of medical documents. Mark's face twisted, his fists clenching at his sides. This is ridiculous. Lily's lying, and that damn soldier filled her head with garbage. Briggs didn't flinch. We have financial records, witness testimony, and medical forgeries with your signature. You're done. As Mark was restrained, Grace hurried upstairs to where she'd been told Lucy was staying. She found the little girl sitting cross-legged on the carpet in a small pink-painted room. Lucy Carter, Lily's twin sister, looked healthier, her blonde curls neatly brushed and her sweater clean and new. But her wide gray eyes mirrored Lily's, filled with confusion and fear. Grace knelt softly in front of her. "Hi, Lucy. My name's Grace. I work with kids and families to make sure you're safe. I need you to come with me now, okay?" Lucy hesitated, glancing toward the commotion downstairs. Her voice was soft and unsure. "Where's Lily?" Grace smiled gently, holding out her hand. "She's safe. I promise you'll see her soon." Lucy nodded silently, her small fingers sliding into Grace's gloved hand. Downstairs, Officer Whitlock packed up a box of seized evidence. Stacks of fraudulent medical forms, Riverside Care grant letters, and dozens of printed photos used to fake Lily's illness. One image showed Lily pale and exhausted, a dark bruise beneath her eye, stage suffering Mark had documented to secure extra funding. By noon, Mark was loaded into the back of a squad car, his jaw set in silent fury. Lucy was escorted into a CPS vehicle, bundled tightly in a red winter coat Grace had brought for her. Back at Ethan's house, Lily sat by the window, knees tucked under her chin as she stared at the snow falling outside. Shadow rested his chin on her lap, his warm breath fogging the glass. When Ethan returned with Grace and Lucy, the small girl's breath hitched in surprise. "Lucy!" Lily whispered, her gray eyes wide. Lucy stepped forward carefully, her gloved hands twisting nervously. "Lily," she said softly, before Shadow bounded forward, tail wagging, breaking the tension. The twins clung to each other silently, holding on as though afraid the moment would dissolve. Ethan watched them, his throat tightening, but when Lily turned and gave him the smallest, genuine smile he'd ever seen from her, it felt like sunlight cutting through endless clouds. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the weight on his chest ease. Lily wasn't just surviving anymore. She was beginning to live. The snow had melted, leaving the quiet town of Sebago awash in soft shades of green and gold. Spring had finally arrived, and the air carried the damp, earthy scent of new beginnings. A light breeze rippled across the surface of the vast lake beyond Ethan Hayes' new wooden cabin, nestled beneath tall pines and birches that stood like silent guardians of the secluded haven. 6 months had passed since the stormy night when Ethan found Lily Carter at the abandoned subway station in Portland. Now, the little girl who once trembled in the shadows sat cross-legged on the porch steps, her blonde hair brighter under the soft sunlight, her gray eyes reflecting the rippling lake. Beside her, Shadow, the 5-year-old German shepherd, stretched lazily, his thick black and tan coat shining in the warm glow as his amber eyes scanned the woods for movement. Inside the cabin, the smell of pine wood and fresh paint mingled, the marks of Ethan's careful handiwork visible in every corner. He'd rebuilt much of the place himself, filling it with framed photos, shelves of Lily's drawings, and little signs of life that hadn't existed in his old house. For Ethan, the move wasn't just about safety. It was a chance to start over, to carve out a space where Lily could finally grow without fear. Today was no ordinary day. Today, they would go to the county courthouse to finalize Ethan's adoption of Lily. He stood in front of the small mirror by the door, adjusting the collar of his crisp gray shirt. The steel blue eyes staring back at him were different than the ones he'd seen 6 months ago. Less haunted, steadier, alive in a way he hadn't thought possible since Emily's passing. Lily padded into the room quietly, wearing a pale yellow dress Sarah Coleman had gifted her, her small hands clutching the worn pink backpack she refused to part with. "Do we really have to go to court?" she asked softly. Ethan crouched down, his beard brushing the top of his shirt collar as he met her gaze. "Just this one last time, kiddo," he said gently. "After today, nobody gets to question where you belong anymore." Lily hesitated before smiling faintly, her shoulders relaxing. "Okay, as long as Shadow comes too." Shadow's ears perked at the sound of his name, his tail thumping lazily against the wooden floor. The drive to the courthouse was quiet but comfortable, the hum of the engine mingling with the soft rustle of spring leaves outside. When they arrived, Sarah Coleman was already waiting on the courthouse steps. Dressed in a cream blazer and tailored trousers, her auburn bob shining in the morning light, she gave Ethan a warm smile that softened the sharpness usually present in her deep green eyes. "You made it," Sarah said, crouching slightly to meet Lily's gaze. "Ready to make it official?" Lily nodded, holding Shadow's leash tightly. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was lighter this time, the tension that had once gripped Ethan replaced with quiet anticipation. Seated at the front bench was Judge Rebecca Moore, dressed in her traditional black robe, her dark brown hair pinned neatly at the back. Her deep-set brown eyes softened as she scanned the documents before her. "Mr. Hayes," she began, her voice measured but kind, "today we're here to finalize your petition to adopt Lily Carter. I see the necessary evaluations from CPS, the psychological assessments, and the recommendation from Miss Grace Morgan." At the mention of Grace, Ethan glanced toward the second row, where the caseworker sat in a soft gray sweater and black slacks, her hazel eyes glimmering with satisfaction. She'd been there from the start, the first person to truly fight for Lily's safety. And today her expression carried a quiet pride. Judge Moore looked toward Lily, who sat between Ethan and Sarah, with Shadow curled protectively at her feet. "Lily, would you like to say anything?" The little girl hesitated, fingers fidgeting with the hem of her dress, but after a glance at Ethan and a reassuring nudge from Shadow, she spoke softly. I just want to stay with Ethan. And Shadow. This is home now." Judge Moore's stern expression softened into the faintest smile before she turned back to her paperwork. "Then, with the authority vested in me by the state of Maine, I hereby grant the petition. Effective immediately, Lily Carter will now be known as Lily Hayes." Sarah placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, squeezing lightly, while Grace dabbed at the corner of her eyes with a tissue. Ethan's chest tightened as he looked down at Lily, who sat wide-eyed, her small lips curling into a hesitant but genuine smile. Outside the courthouse, the spring air felt lighter, warmer somehow. Lily clutched Shadow tightly as Ethan lifted her into his arms, holding her close against his chest. "You're safe now," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "We're a family." The drive back to Sebago felt different this time, the kind of quiet filled with meaning rather than uncertainty. When they arrived at the cabin, Ethan placed the new nameplate on the door. The Hayes family. Later that evening, Ethan grilled chicken on the back porch, while Lily painted on a small easel nearby. Her strokes were messy but joyful, splashes of blue and green filling the page. Shadow lay stretched out between them, ears twitching every time Lily giggled softly. "Can I hang this one in the living room?" Lily asked, holding up her painting proudly. Ethan smiled, brushing his fingers over the smudge of yellow on her cheek. "Every single one of them goes up." As dusk settled over the lake, the three sat together on the porch, Ethan, Lily, and Shadow, watching the sunlight dance across the rippling water. For the first time in years, Ethan felt his chest lighten, the shadows of the past softening beneath the warmth of belonging. They had all been broken once, but now they were whole. Sometimes, God sends us miracles in the most unexpected ways. Ethan thought his life was over, losing his wife, his daughter, and nearly his faith. But on a freezing winter night, God led him to Lily, and through her, gave him a reason to live again. Every day, around us, there are people and children silently fighting battles we cannot see. Sometimes, all it takes is one small act of kindness, one moment of courage to change someone's life forever. And maybe, just maybe, God wants you to be that miracle for someone. If you believe in second chances, if you believe God still works through love and compassion, then this story is a reminder. Even in the coldest winters, He never forgets us. May God bless you and your family. May He guide your steps, protect your heart, and fill your days with hope. If this story touched your heart, please share it so more people can feel its warmth. Comment Amen if you believe in God's miracles. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of hope, faith, and second chances. Because somewhere out there, someone is praying for a miracle, and maybe you are the answer.